The chair lays out SB2 by Creighton as the companion to HB3 relating to the establishment of an education savings account program, which was previously heard and left pending. The chair offers a committee substitute. Members, the committee substitute for Senate Bill 2 contains the same ESA program structure outlined in House Bill 3 that we heard on March 11th for more than 21 hours. The committee substitute contains the following changes. The substitute establishes a $1 billion statutory expenditure cap on the ESA program for the first biennium, mirroring the $1 billion appropriation limit in the state budget. It limits the ESA funding for students eligible in Tier 4 to 20% of the program's total budget and prioritizes students that were previously enrolled in public school over those already enrolled in private schools. This provision expires after the 26-27 school year. The substitute clarifies that students enrolled in private school must be tested in third grade and above. The bill requires that a child may not participate in the program unless the child's parent establishes that the child is a citizen or national of the United States or was lawfully admitted into the United States. If an ESA student chooses to return to a public school during the school year, that student shall be excluded from the accountability system, and the receiving school district will be entitled to additional 10% of state funding for the remainder of the school year. The committee substitute makes explicit that a participant cannot receive, withdraw cash, or reimbursement, and that a certified education assistance organization cannot charge a fee. Lastly, the bill clarifies that the amount appropriated for purposes of the program must be established by the legislative appropriations process, and it makes various changes suggested by the comptroller for program implementation. Okay, members, with that, are there any questions? Let me move to the next article. All right. Any questions? All right, Representative Talrico.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's actually very helpful to have these two bills side by side because we just talked about the dire straits that our schools are in. We've got campuses closing all over the state, including in my district, in Dallas, in San Antonio, in El Paso. Communities all over the state are closing campuses. We have teachers who are making less than they did 10 years ago when you adjust for inflation. We have teachers in my district who are driving Ubers at night to make extra money. And local property taxes are through the roof because the state government has not done its fair share of school funding. We are taking a step to fix that, a step. We're not catching us up to 2019 funding levels, but it is progress. But now we're considering a bill that's going to send $1 billion in the first year and perhaps $7 billion in the second biennium to kids who are in private school or kids who are homeschooled, kids who are not even in our public schools currently. And I do not know how we justify this decision. Until our schools are fully funded, until we are out of this school funding emergency, I don't think we should even be entertaining this bill. But since we are, I do have questions. So in terms of changes, in our last hearing on the bill, we established that while the cost of this program starts at $1 billion in the first biennium, LBB forecasts that it will balloon to $7 billion in the second biennium. Is that correct?
That's the LBB fiscal note.
And LBB is what you earlier called the gold standard? Okay.
It is the metric we use in this body.
Right. So the gold standard, the Legislative Budget Board, the gold standard, says that this bill will grow to $7 billion in the second biennium. Is there anything in this bill that limits that growth?
The bill limits the appropriation during the first biennium to $1 billion, and then the second biennium is literally up to the legislature.
Are you in this new version of the bill mandating that the comptroller's office, who we've charged with administering this program, is mandated to request from the legislature in the second biennium that we cover every child on the wait list and all of their siblings?
That is their request. It does not have to be granted.
But we are mandating that they request that.
Yes, that gives them the guidance of what they are to come to the legislature, the appropriative process with that ask, if you will.
In 2011, in in the 2011 legislative session, right before I started teaching at San Antonio ISD, Texas was recovering from the Great Recession and cut $5.4 billion from our public schools. I saw firsthand the impacts of those cuts. I saw kids fall through the cracks in front of my eyes because of the decision that people made in this building. Is there anything in this bill that if we face a recession, that this money that we're sending to wealthy families that are sending their kids to private school will be cut first before we ever touch our public schools?
The appropriation process is in the hands of the legislature, just as it is every session. And Representative, I'll read that.
This is coming from general revenue,
Yes.
and we can use general revenue funds to give to our public schools.
We can use general revenue for whatever purpose the legislature feels is needed.
Including public schools.
Absolutely.
So it's the same pot of money.
No, there's not a dollar of property tax money that goes into the ESA program. It is all money that's in the general revenue.
All money. It's all money that's in the general revenue. So it's all money in the same pot.
Yeah, but the school fund, permanent school fund, and
I'm not asking
the
about
available school fund, but the available school fund is not part of general revenue.
Yep. But we can use general revenue funds for public schools.
We can use general revenue funds for anything, and if you look in the current state budget, we're using it for about 10,000 things.
Could we spend the $1 billion appropriated for subsidizing private school tuition for kids in private school, or the $7 billion that it's forecasted to grow to in the second millennium? Could we use that money to help our public schools?
If the legislature appropriates it and the governor signs it, that is what this body is for.
Okay. In our conversations, you mentioned the concern that was brought up multiple times in the hearing on this bill that the money will go to wealthier families in the state. We talked about how in every state that's tried vouchers, the money is disproportionately helping wealthier families rather than low-income families, because wealthier families already have their kids in private school, and so they cleared that first big hurdle. And there is no limit on who's eligible. We don't limit this to low-income families. We don't limit this to middle-class families. It is literally open to anyone. And to get the funds, you have to be admitted to the private school. So because of those structural barriers, these programs, when implemented in other states, tend to help wealthier families. You heard that, and I appreciated that, and you put a 20% limit on the rich parents who could get these funds. Is that correct?
Yes, that is in the committee substitute, which is before the committee today.
And that 20% limit expires after the first year.
That is correct.
So after the first year, there will be no limit on how many wealthy parents can access these funds.
Well, it will be limited by the amount of money the legislature chooses to appropriate for the program.
Okay.
That would limit everyone, by the way.
So millionaire households, even billionaire households, could apply for these funds and would be eligible for these funds.
Anyone can apply in the first class, if you will, of students that could receive it. If you earn greater, if you're a regular education student, and you earn, your family earns more than $160,000 a year, the total appropriation in there is limited, or the total participants are limited to 20% of the appropriation.
In the first year.
Yes, in the first biennium. Yes.
You've seen that Elon Musk has tweeted his support for this bill.
I have not.
He tweeted out that he wants the Texas legislature to pass this bill. Elon Musk is a Texas resident, so would he theoretically be eligible to apply for these funds?
Yes.
I'm guessing he's probably priority number 4.
But he would be eligible.
Yes.
It was just announced that Elon has fathered his 14th child. I looked into this. 8 of them are under school age.
Elon Musk is not in the committee substitute, but you can keep asking.
So I just want to use this as a thought experiment. So let's say he gets a voucher for each of those 8 children. That's over $80,000 a year in taxpayer funds, more than what most teachers make. And so if you sent them to a private school from pre-K to senior year, that's a total of $1.2 million in taxpayer funds for Elon Musk, theoretically.
No. Or it's, 15,000 to a working family in Killeen, Texas at Oak Creek who are struggling to keep their kids there who have special needs. I mean, anyone's eligible.
And we
So,
could,
we can use it, and with all respect, we can use extremes, and Elon Musk is an easy punching bag for lots of reasons. But the reality is that, in all seriousness, there are many families that either have kids in public school or those struggling with kids in private school right now that benefit from this bill.
Mr. Chairman, I'm being deadly serious. If we wanted to help that family in Killeen, we could limit this program to that family, to working class parents across the state, could we not?
The legislature can do what we want to do.
But, sir,
But
Mr. Chairman, you're the author of this bill.
Yeah, I am.
You could limit it to middle class and working class families if you wanted to, but you are allowing, I know Elon Musk is a somewhat humorous example, but wealthy parents, whether they're whether they're the richest man in the world or whether they're just a family making over $500,000 a year, they have access to this program. So it is not limited to that family that you just mentioned, a working class family in Killeen.
Elon Musk could send his kids to public school as well.
And so
Many millionaires and billionaires do.
right. And we all pay for our public schools so they can be free to everyone, and they are accountable to the taxpayer.
And the
And
families,
these schools,
Mr. Tallarico, the families at Tallarico, a corporal in the Army and a mother who works fast food are paying their property taxes like everybody else, paying for public schools. They found that a private setting was a better setting for their children. And so the argument, to me just falls flat that only people with kids in school are paying for public schools, and somehow if you're not, we all do that, and we all do it with the good in mind of that. So my kids all went to public school,
Mr. Chairman,
and I continue to pay my property taxes with no kids in school.
we all pay for our public highways, correct?
Absolutely.
Can I take from the TxDOT budget to repave my driveway?
No.
I don't.
So,
So you're not authorized by law to do so.
right. The point is, some things we do together and some things we do on our own. No one is preventing a family from sending their kids to private school,
Yes, their individual circumstance does sometimes, Mr. Tallarico.
but no one here
Their
is making.
circumstance, their financial circumstance, actually their address does that.
But no
The
one here
address
is-
where they can live, Mr. Tallarico.
Mr. Chairman, is anyone here making it illegal for a family to send their child to a private school?
I'm sorry?
Is anyone here trying to make it illegal for a family to send their child to a private school?
No, but what we're trying to do is to give parents more tools in their toolbox, because raising kids and educating kids is difficult. It's very complicated. And what it looks like for me, it may not look like the same way for you. It might look not the same way for Mr. Cunningham. I mean, this body cannot contemplate the circumstance that some children are placed. And this is just another option for parents.
But Mr. Chairman, respectfully, if our goal was to help the families you just mentioned that are limited by income, we could do that in this bill.
Mm-hmm.
We could limit it to families who need extra help, but we're not doing that. And so then my concern is, when you look at Florida, 70% of the users of their voucher program were people who already had their kids in private school. In Arkansas, it was 95%. And so my concern is that if this plays out like I think it will, you're actually going to be taking the tax dollars of plumbers and nurses and working people, and you're going to be subsidizing the tuition of wealthy families who already have their kids at St. John's, St. Mark's, St. Stephen's. So that is a transfer of wealth from the bottom to the top. I know the rhetoric around this bill is around helping working class people or helping poor kids, but your bill does not match the rhetoric. Your bill is opening the door to some of the wealthiest people in the state taking taxpayer funds to do something they're paying for anyway. And so I just, in good conscience, of course, can't support that kind of policy. And I think it would be a wise decision by this committee and by the Texas House to limit this to the students that you say you want to help. And if that is true, then you can do that in your bill. And you've made a decision not to. And in fact, we made a decision to remove that limit in the first biennium.
But Mr. Tyler, I don't presume to be the one that ought to be judge and jury on other people's children.
You think that's what I'm saying, Mr. Chairman?
I do not. No, I do not know.
Okay, then
I do not know.
let's not.
No, I'm just saying I don't know the circumstance of every family, and I don't know their tax returns, and I don't know the particular challenges a child is having.
Sure.
But what I do know is that when you put choice in the hands of parents, they will make the right call. And I think that the circumstance in which they will make that will look different from family to family. And that's I know that's what this bill does.
And currently in Texas, a parent can choose between their neighborhood school, a public charter school, magnet school, early college high school, career and technical school, academies. There is school choice in Texas. And all of those options that I mentioned are accountable to the taxpayer. That's why they get taxpayer funds. Taxation with representation. We fought a revolution over this. And so my point is that to then open this up to private schools that are unaccountable to the taxpayer, they don't have to follow any of the same rules. They don't have to accept the same students. They don't have to take the same test. To open it up to unaccountable private schools that aren't accountable to the taxpayer doesn't protect all of us who pay for public schools. We want parents to have options. You know that I have been a big proponent of more options for parents. We have a program currently that allows, if your child is in a school that's struggling academically, to transfer to a different public school. We have that in law. And I'm for even more options. If this committee wants to get together and figure out more options for parents, I'm all here. What I want to caution us against is taking away tax dollars from those real choice options and giving it to an unaccountable system that is going to primarily serve the wealthy few. That is the problem here. And so I resent the effort to use parents or use choice to pass a bill that will help the wealthiest families in the state at the expense of working class kids all over Texas.
Well, I resent the fact that your address should dictate the quality of education.
I do too, Mr. Chairman. That's why.
Well, then that's not real choice, Mr. Tyler.
So how does
a really good choice for?
I
know. Okay, I apologize.
No, go ahead.
No, what I'm telling you is this: is we know when we look at the outcomes that we see in our school districts across Texas, it's not difficult to know which districts are going to do well. But there are struggling parents in those districts. There are struggling parents in districts and from families that are certainly not as fortunate as you or I are in terms of our economic status. And all this does is doesn't make anybody do anything. It simply provides a choice. Nobody, if it were to be, there could be 0 applicants for this. But if a parent believes that this is the best opportunity for their child to receive what they need, and with 3 very unique children and having faced those moments before, I wholeheartedly understand that type of decision a parent needs to make or that they have to make, and this is simply an option for them to do so.
And you know that I taught in one of the poorest zip codes in the state, in a struggling public school that didn't have enough desks for all the kids in my classroom. And instead of giving $1 billion, $7 billion in second biennium to that school to help kids who need help urgently, we're going to be allowing the wealthy families in the state to use this precious taxpayer money. So, of course, I think there are too many inequalities, too many disparities in our system. That's why I'm here in the legislature. That's why I'm on this committee to solve that. I work with the other members of this committee to address that. My problem is that this bill is going to make those problems worse, not better. It's taking money that could be going to those struggling public schools that desperately need the funds, and it's going to be shipping that money off to families who don't need it, who are already paying for their private school tuition. And I just think that is a deeply, deeply immoral decision. And I urge this body and this committee to make a different choice and to use this precious taxpayer dollars to help our neighborhood public schools that need it. Because every budget decision is a choice. I know some of us want to say, oh, we can do both. We have limited funds in this state. And if every dollar that we send to a family who's already got their kid in private school is a dollar that's not going to our public schools. And the bill we just heard, although it makes good progress, doesn't even catch our schools up to 2019 funding levels. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Members, any more questions? Representative Hinojosa.
I don't know why
I don't know why we wasted so much time on this issue when 5.5 million school kids in the state have a right to public schools, attend public schools, and it is the only option for all Texas students. Our focus should be on investing in what is the right of every student in the state of Texas and not creating this lifeboat for people to leave the system, just a certain few, just a chosen few, when there's so much work to do in our ISDs. We heard from even the witnesses who were here in support of the voucher of no statewide program or a taxpayer-funded voucher where achievement improved. In fact, not for a statewide voucher, unless they could discriminate against the students who they accepted, which just should not be an option with public dollars. In fact, we heard that all of the studies show, and we heard from an expert here who used to be a proponent of vouchers who said, all of the studies show learning loss, catastrophic learning loss associated with vouchers on par with COVID. It's historic learning loss. This bill increases the demands on the taxpayer because they have to fund a whole now new lane of schools. And in fact, we are saying that after this next year cap expires, they could be on the hook for the private school tuition of every child currently in private school. And really, it's those kids who are most likely to get the voucher because the first hurdle to overcome to get into the taxpayer-funded voucher program is to be accepted to the private school, right? So you can prioritize all you want. If a kid can't get in because they can't pay the rest of the tuition, because they have a disciplinary record, because they just are not the right fit, because they're not the right religion, because they are disabled, because this bill expands the opportunity to discriminate against our kids who need a special education and who are disabled.
Ms. Inhofe, please address the committee substitute.
Okay, well, this is all in the committee substitute. It increases recapture on my district, and I don't see a way we pass this bill and not make TRS actuarially unsound. And I will say we asked to question Mr. Guthrie from the TRS about this bill, and we have not been given that opportunity. We have serious concerns and questions with the impact that this has on TRS at a time when we struggle to attract and retain quality teachers in our classroom. It scares me that this is going to make matters worse. And there's something in particular about this bill that I just think adds insult to injury. And it's on page 22. On page 22, line 19, this says, right, because we know that what the fiscal note says, this voucher will be $11,000. A student who gets this voucher will get $11,693 because that is 85% of the estimated statewide average, which is on page 21. By 2030, it will be $12,282. If we increase student funding for ISDs and charters by this session, it will be more than that, by the way, right? Because this is based on current funding. This number is based on current funding. But this estimated statewide average includes the amount the state is required to contribute to the teacher retirement system of Texas. So it creates this never-ending loop, right? We grow the program that subtracts from TRS, teachers made into the program, and then we have to factor in the part that the state has to put back in to the system to make it sound, and then that grows the program. It's this never-ending loop that is nuts. I think it makes no sense. I want to bring our attention to some other just real basic problems in this bill, even for people who might be supporters of this policy. From on page 23, on page 23, there is a provision, line 21, on line 21, and this is supposed to be the hold harmless for school districts, that if a child comes back from a voucher program, comes back from the private school, that the school district gets made whole. My understanding is, and we've talked about this, I want to bring it up here so that we remember to work on this, because all this says is that if a student goes back, the district is entitled to an allotment of the basic allotment multiplied 0.1. And this is notwithstanding any other law. So that comes out to, I think, $622, which is a decrease.
Plus the basic allotment.
Okay. I appreciate that that's your intent.
When HB2 is in effect, it would be $7,400 plus whatever weighted funding the student receives given their circumstance.
I appreciate that that's your intent. I don't see where it says that in the bill. And so I would ask that be addressed. I want to say one more thing about the hold harmless. The hold harmless tells school districts that that child is not subject to their accountability rating scores for the first year after the child ceases participation in the program. I think that needs to be at least 2 years to undo the harm that will be done by catastrophic learning loss. I will say I'm disappointed that still we will be using these taxpayer dollars to market a program that is competition against our ISDs. We don't use state dollars to market for our public schools. I wish we did. I wish we had a San Antonio style Go Public campaign for Texas public schools. That would be pretty awesome. And I think that money would be better spent there. So I regret that that is still in there. And on page 13, it deals with assessment. And I want to talk about this too, because this is an issue that is close to the hearts of many parents, and me in particular, because in the name of accountability, my child is subject to the STAR test because his education is paid for with taxpayer dollars. These kids, who are probably, most of them, already in private school, won't have to be subject to the accountability my son is subject to. A system that I have spoken about before, that when my son was in second grade, tried to run away from the school because they were doing STAR test practice, and it was too much for him. We will never get this test off the backs of our public school students if we have a test for the has and the test for the have-nots. And so I take great offense to the fact that we would not require the exact same test of these students who use taxpayer dollars for their education. I want to say one more thing about that. We just received word that the lawsuits that so many school districts brought against TEA on the accountability system has been ruled in TEA's favor by a court that is appointed entirely by Greg Abbott.
Let's sell the bill, please.
The system feels rigged, and we shouldn't be contributing to that. So I would ask that we look at how that is equitable for our students and do a better job there. There's another issue that I don't understand, and it seems like the bill is in contradiction of itself. On page 31, It says the state agency may not adopt a rule or take other action related to the program that limits an education service provider, vendor, or program participant. The program participant is the student as defined in this bill, from freely determining methods or curriculum. So here we say the state agency cannot get involved with what curriculum and what methods students use with this taxpayer-funded voucher. Earlier in the bill, though, for homeschoolers, we say, well, earlier in the bill, we have TEA has to approve all this stuff and the comptroller too. So I would ask that we look at that. I know it's a big concern of the homeschoolers, of which I have many in my district, by the way, that there would be these kinds of strings attached. So I think that's inconsistent. I don't think that's true in the bill. If the other part of the bill remains. And, you know, at a time, look, I ran for office. I ran for the Texas House also because of school funding. I was on the school board. I figured out, oh, guess what? Those money decisions of not having enough money getting it here. That's why my son's school is threatened for closure. We had a meeting in our school district last week talking about more school closures. And when you look at a bill that is projected to take billions and billions of more, billion this writing that we could use on our public school students and billions more in the future when our schools are so far behind and school districts are having to make tough decisions of closing schools. This just makes no sense.
Thank you, Representative. I think you summed up in one of your first sentences what I believe about this bill. You described it as a life vote. I've never seen anyone jump off of a perfectly good vote, especially for their kids. And so I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I mean that's the way that I look at this.
Except the ship is sinking that has all the other kids in it. That is the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Representative Leo Wilson.
I just wanted to ask a couple questions. I remember TRS was here, and I remember that Brian Guthrie corrected the record that had been out there in the papers, and he even corrected it in the Texas Tribune, stating that school choice will not harm TRS, and that the portion that they were looking at was the teacher pay increase. And that in the future, that could be a problem if we didn't look at that as a legislature, maybe, in the future for stabilizing and making it actuarially sound.
That is correct. There was no significant actuarial impact from the bill before the committee on the teacher retirement system.
Okay.
Any other
And then one
questions?
other
Right, yeah, I'm sorry. You have more questions?
Yeah. And then one other thing that I wanted to make sure that we're looking at is, we have an advantage in looking at the 32 other states that have school choice. And so when we're looking at that, I think it's important, Mr. Chairman, that we don't just look at programs for that first year program expansion and look at the income levels that are in that first year level expansion, because wouldn't you say that clearly parents that are already using some form of school choice have that information? And as that information spreads, it's important to look at the whole picture, not just a little narrow, here's who's in the program for first year expansion. And the reason I'm saying that is when you look at the whole scope of it, 82% of the Arizona ESA participants have an income less than $150,000 per year. So every year that those programs have grown in other states, that takes in more and more of those low-income students as they become more informed that there are options. Same thing with Indiana. 75% of those have families with less than 150. So I don't. I think it's important to look at the whole scope and not just a couple of programs on what happened during that first year of expansion. Don't you?
Yeah. Again, yes, I think the bill speaks to that. That is the data as we have it across the country. I do want every member to keep the commentary towards the committee sub. It's a formal meeting about this bill, so let's keep it all directed towards that. Any more questions?
I do have.
Okay, about the committee sub.
Well, the committee sub, and when we're talking about appropriations and how much does this increase? I know we spend $96 billion overall on pub ed. How much of a portion of this increase would this bill be for pub ed?
I'm sorry.
So how I read this,
It's one the bill spends $1 billion.
okay. So, I guess what I'm frustrated with is when we look at the general fund, as Mr. Tallarico was pointing out, we are appropriators. We have to look at the whole balance of things. So when I'm looking at that, every time you take something away from the grid, it takes away from maybe general fund dollars that you could spend in public ed. Every time you spend on something else, on TxDOT, you're taking money away from something you could spend on the grid. So I guess I get frustrated that this is somehow taking money away because it's not taking anything away from the permanent school fund, correct? It's not taking any money out of the school
correct.
foundation program.
That is correct. $1 million general revenue.
Okay, thank you.
Chair recognizes Dr. Allen for a question.
Thank you. This bill, this voucher bill, will eventually destroy public schools. I give it 10 years, 5 sessions from now. Once you open that box, many of these will pop up and it will eventually destroy public schools. There are not enough private schools to absorb all the children that are in the public school system. There are not public schools out there with seats that are waiting for public schools children to come to occupy. So that simply means all of the children will not have an opportunity to go to a private school. The private schools do not have to take all of the children. Public schools must take everybody who comes to the door. You must take them in and you must do the best you can to educate them. And so, with private public schools, right now, out there in the private schools, you'll see pop-up schools coming, and they are waiting on this voucher bill to pass. You're going to see all kind of pop-up schools, mom and pop schools, schools under the tree, schools everywhere.
Dr. Allen, the bill requires that the schools be accredited, and that's a process, and it's in the bill, but it will not be pop-up schools.
Pop-up accredited schools. Accredited schools. Okay, let's go to those that are accredited now if they're not pop-up under the tree. But if we go to, and I don't want to say that, schools that have tuition under $1,000 are now raising their tuition in anticipation of this bill passing, so that they can absorb the whole $10,000. That's happening, all right. And so that's another avenue for money coming out of public schools. Private schools are not accountable in terms, and you've heard that already, and I was trying not to say anything more, same thing that Gina said, or that anyone else has said already. I'm just pointing out some things that really are going to harm public schools. And so, and with that in mind, nobody who is in public schools and you don't have transportation to get there into the public schools, you're not going to be able to go across town. You have 2 or 3 kids, you can't take them to different schools everywhere. I know you're going to tell me about take a taxi bill and take a Uber and all of that kind of stuff, but there's no transportation for these kids. So it makes it really difficult. In other words, you see that this is really not for all children. And if we're going to help the kids who are in schools that are not servicing them well, we need to invest in public schools too, just like we're investing in vouchers for children to go everywhere. When vouchers come, we kill neighborhood schools. Schools are closing down right now. Programs are being eliminated in schools. This is going to be a detriment to all public schools. And so with that in mind, I don't know anything you can do to fix a bill that convinces me to vote for vouchers. That's going to destroy the schools of the future, will destroy my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren. So I have to think long range before I vote for something that's going to take that out of that. I grew up in a segregated time where we went to, my mother taught in a one-room schoolhouse, and she taught all the kids in the neighborhood. And I remember desks that had carvings in them, and I remember school books that had a student's name already. I remember not having a bus to take us to the school. And so somebody it was a gentleman in the neighborhood who had a truck, and they just put a bed on it, and that's how we got to school. So when I got finished high school, there was nowhere for us to go. So I remember those times, and we're on our way back there to not educated kids. So with that in mind, I will not be voting for the voucher bill.
Chairman Frank.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick clarification and question. First, I love the committee substitute. I appreciate in the initial bill, there was prioritization, clear prioritization based on income, so that literally those who have less will be first come, first served, or will be first served. Also appreciate the addition in the committee sub of the cap to make sure that really we will do everything we can to make sure that those who want access to this can get it. And so that's just a comment. Another second comment, and I will promise I will have a question. We talked about the professor and what the professor said from Michigan that came down that was against they are not vouchers. This is not a voucher bill. It's an ESA. But he said here several times that the studies all show that public school improvement, academic performance improves. Then he went at length talking about, well, it's not huge. I said, but it does improve. So the academic performance, that's what he said, and he was the one that was testifying against it. So the idea that things are going to completely fall apart, I understand if people don't like the bill, but the idea that this is going to destroy public schools is, to me, fear-mongering. So the question I have is, does your bill and the committee sub, does it give parents, in the rare cases where a public school is not serving their needs, and honestly, the very best of public schools sometimes don't fit 1 or 2% of kids, for whatever reason. Sometimes it's the kids' fault. Does this give them options that don't currently exist?
Absolutely.
Is it prioritized based on income?
Yes.
Thank you.
Chairman Dutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I asked this question for several reasons, but when a child from public school gets a voucher to go to private school, do they become private school students or public school students?
They are private school students with certain, I would say, requirements that they have to be part of the program, because there's a selection process, eligibility process for those students.
So their status is no longer a public school student.
They're no longer enrolled in a Texas public school.
Well, you use the term enrolled, and I guess I was trying to figure out from a legal status, is we make several references in the public schools code to public school students. And I'm wondering to what extent, if any, does that change their legal status when they get a voucher and change them from public school student to a private school student?
I'm not sure I understand the question completely, but I believe it only changes really the location of where they receive their education.
Okay, and is that, well, I'm just trying to be sure that the way we attribute certain rights to public school students, will they be extended to those students who get a voucher? And is their status changed to private school students simply because they got the voucher, but since the voucher is really public money, how does that affect their status, their legal status?
Well, they're afforded the same rights that every American is in terms of their personal liberties and rights. I would say that one of the concerns against folks that are, let's say, not for this bill is that the IDEA protections or that status that we have of public schools because of all the federal regulation. The bill clearly states that the parent is made aware of that, but then that parent makes that decision when they join that private school that they are not in a public school. But that is not mutually exclusive of the delivery of great services for those students. It is simply done in a different setting, where in the public setting, it's sort of a partnership between school and federal government and state government and the parent, where when really at the private school level, I believe you have the school and the parent that are primarily involved, and of course the student.
Right. Well, it's from a legal standpoint, I was just trying to balance whether or not, to what extent that has changed. But let me ask another question. And it's a response to Chairman Fink. There's a designation based on money, based on how much a family makes in terms of the availability of.
Yes, sir.
Why do we do this? Why do we do that?
Well, we try to set up a priority schedule that provides opportunities to children that we know have typically struggled more with their academic outcomes. And we arrange those in a way that I think people agree that if we put people in line for the program, that's basically the way we line them up.
And so we recognize, though, by doing that family income levels play a part in access to the voucher.
Yeah, they are. The lower income is basically is a different spot in the line than upper income. However, we prioritize an income level and special needs students before children with special needs. Excuse me, without special needs based on their income.
So the lower income. So this is really designed primarily for lower income students.
Yeah, income level is it's special education students with a certain income level, then regular ed kids of a certain income level. Then it progresses up in higher level as we go up the chain of prioritization. Yes, sir. It is prioritized in a way that we believe will match the needs of families, but it also doesn't assume that other families don't have significant concerns with their children as well.
And finally, Mr. Chairman, one of the things that bothered me about this, and we do this almost in every hearing we have, but I don't care what committee it is, we generally have to try to listen to all the stakeholders. And the one stakeholder missing from this hearing were the private schools themselves. So we did have a person testifying on behalf of the association and all that. But I'm thinking of the private schools themselves, and I would love to, and I think all of us would have benefited from hearing directly from them
And we did. I mean, we had testimony from the Catholic schools and from the private school association, but also a superintendent of a private school from San Marcos was here, as well as some other folks that were here that actually worked. Were working in private schools as we speak today.
Well, I guess I was thinking of some of the private schools that I particularly know in Harris County, for example. It would have been great to hear how they're going to respond to this and whether or not they're going to be acknowledging our priority list, for example, and whether they'll even pay attention to it or whether they won't, and whether or not we're actually offering the kind of resource that they would be looking at in terms of getting some of these students. Because I fear that what we're designing is not what they're looking at. And I'd like for us to know that before we make the choice on how we do this, because, and I recognize that the votes are there to perhaps do this, but I think our commitment is we ought to make sure that it's done properly. And that's the only.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, Mr. Chairman, I think from Catholic School Association, the bishops that were here, I recall you working the room a little bit to try to get some old schools reopened in your district. Well, and I don't know if you were successful or not. I hadn't seen the flyer yet.
Well, when I asked the chairman about if I voted for this bill, will they reopen the 2 schools in my district?
Sir, I will not ever put words in your mouth, but I'm not sure that's what you asked.
Well, I did. That's what I asked.
Well, he said it, not me.
That's what I asked, and I think we all heard their answer too. So anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. All right. Chair recognizes Representative Brad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, how many students will leave public schools for private schools if we pass SB3?
I don't think we know. I mean, I think because nobody has to.
I haven't looked at the larger states that have done this.
I believe that most states, if you look at mature programs over time, you would have possibly in Florida, maybe it's, 7-8% of the total. I mean, that's after 20-something years of having school choice. But I think you kind of see a consistency across the country. But I think in Texas that remains to be seen, because parents will ultimately decide, and parents will make all kinds of decisions.
How many students will leave public schools for homeschooling?
I don't know how to make that. Again, that's a decision the parent will make.
Well, if you don't have any real idea about it, then the question occurs, where did you come up with the amount of money in the bill?
Well, the amount is the decision of the legislature to start a program to give access, to give enough access to try to meet the needs of students. We anticipate that there are needs, and there are students that will leave. Some will leave public school. Some will become homeschool students, and that's we will have to see what that is.
Well, you're the author of a bill, and presumably when you put a large sum of money in a bill like this, it's based upon recognition of a certain need based on people who have expressed a desire to leave public school and go to private schools, or based upon the experience in other states. And you don't have an estimate.
Well, there's an estimate that you'll have this program could probably fund in the end, I guess technically 100,000 kids, maybe 80,000, depending on, which children they are and which children choose. What I do know, as the author of the bill, that what informed me about the need was something very personal and very much at home. And that was a children that I know that had struggled with special needs, and they had moved from public school to private school, or in the process of doing it, or were struggling in public schools. And that's where I became what informed me about my decisions on this issue overall.
Well, that may inform your decision about the issue overall, but I'm asking about where you came up with an estimate of how many people will utilize this process, and therefore how much money we need to put into it. And I'm hearing you say, well, you don't really know or really have any idea how many people will want to utilize this.
Well, we do know that with the money, that it will not exceed the amount of money appropriated.
In the question.
But that's not an answer to my question. I could do the math. I can divide 10,000 into $1 billion to come up with 100,000. I'm asking, did you do any calculation with regard to how many students need this program before you?
Maybe 1 to 1.5% would be an uptake rate to start, I would think.
And what's that based on? Is it some experience or?
No, it's based on looking at programs across the country. It's looking, everybody sort of implements in a different way, and so that changes it. But that's sort of the overall.
Okay, in 2023, you introduced a similar bill, but it was only $500 million. It wasn't $1 billion. So what happened to cause you to increase it from $500 million to $1 billion?
That was the appropriation that is in the budget, and that's what has been designated by the legislature. That would be before the Texas House here next week.
Well, you're the author of the bill, and you designated the amount of money in the bill. And in 2023, you designated $500 million. And 2 years later, you designated $1 billion. Did your study indicate that twice as many kids wanted to access this as in 2023?
I believe it reflects what we believe will be the demand for the opportunity, that we will not know for certain until we see the program stood up and begin to function.
So it's really not based upon any kind of calculation as to need. It's just a figure, right?
Well,
It's not based upon the fact that you studied or had somebody else study other districts, other states to see what happened, or something unique about our state to be able to estimate how many kids need this in order to move from public schools to private schools.
I think you have seen historically what has happened in other states as percentages, and I think that you will likely see Texas parents sort of operate under that same level of participation, or they may not.
Are you aware that the Legislative Budget Board has indicated it's estimated that 65% of all the students that leave public schools, that access the voucher will be people who are already in private schools? Are you aware of that Legislative Budget Board?
That is their information they provide.
So you are aware of it?
Yeah.
Okay. And so this bill is going to pay for the education in private school of, if your estimate is right, well, let's just take their estimate. This bill then is going to pay for kids who are already in private school to continue in private school. It's going to subsidize their tuition. And in fact, 2/3 of them are already in private school. Is that correct?
It is. It will depend on who applies. LBB has their estimate, but it is an estimate.
Well, do you agree with their estimate?
I'm not certain. I know that there are folks at Oak Creek Academy in Killeen that will apply. I mean, I know that, and folks at St. Joseph's in Killeen Catholic School.
If I proposed $1 billion for public schools in an amendment to one of your bills, wouldn't you ask me to justify that figure and explain why it is needed? You would ask me to justify that. And I'm asking you to justify this figure in your bill today.
Yeah, because this bill creates an opportunity. As was said from this dais, a lifeboat. And we don't know how many are going to jump on the lifeboat. And for those families, some of those have made that decision to be in private school already, and others may be in public school. Others may choose homeschool. We will see, and we have an amount of funding that is derived, so we know the amount that a child will generally get, depending on their special needs status or not, and that will sort of guide that sort of guides our view of how many kids could be in the program. But in the end of the day, we will have to see how many children choose to participate.
Now, what proportion of these children that choose to participate are the parents?
As parents choose, yeah.
They'll choose, but what proportion of the children that benefit from your proposal would be private schoolers, and what percentage would be homeschoolers?
I think LBV has some determination of that, what they think, but I don't think we know for sure what that mix of students will be.
Do you acknowledge the teacher retirement system's consultant estimate that for every 10 children that leave the public schools, one teacher or other educational professional will also leave?
I saw that. I don't believe TRS agreed with that assessment.
Well, TRS testified to that in front of the pensions committee. I was present.
Well, TRS indicated that there would be no significant impact from this bill on the TRS system. They have more concerns about other bills than they on the TRS system than this.
And TRS's consultant already stated, this is called, their name is GRS, their outside consultant, stated in their letter of February the 3rd that the teacher retirement system is already not in compliance with normal actuarial standards. It is in compliance with an artificial state standard of 31 years of amortization, but it's not in compliance with actuarial standards. Any change in the number of people that are contributing to the teacher retirement system will make it further out of compliance with actuarial standards. Isn't that logical?
It's also logical that increasing teacher pay will make them further out of compliance. Both those things are true.
I don't understand how that could be, because their contribution would go up if you raise their pay.
Well, also their benefits go up, and that's a larger percent impact on actuarial soundness or years, a number of years, than the bill before us today.
Let's suppose no homeschoolers got involved in it, because they're getting about $2,000, I believe, and it's only 100,000 private schools. In other words, we divide $10,000 into a billion, and that comes out to 100,000 people that utilize the $10,000 voucher. And 100,000 students leave the public school system and go to private schools. That would mean that 10,000 teachers or other educational professionals also left the system, wouldn't it?
That's a hypothetical that
That's
has not been borne out in any other state, that 100% of the students that left left schools to go to a private school. I have more faith in our public schools than that. That parents would choose to leave.
Well, then the figure of $1 billion is too high, isn't it?
I'm sorry?
You put $1 billion in here and you've offered a $10,000 voucher. That means 100,000 kids.
Well, not necessarily, because you have special needs kids that can generate up to 30,000, and that can impact it. And we don't know their individual, needs or what they will need, or what that exact amount will be.
So
There'll be a number of students, a mixed, first class, those that initially receive it, that will be some from public school, some currently in private, and some families from homeschools.
And you don't have any idea how it's going to come out.
All I know is we will not spend more than $1 billion. That is absolutely a cap.
That's just in the first biennium, isn't that correct?
That is the first. And then after that, this legislature can appropriate $1 billion again, or they can appropriate $0. It is in the hands of the legislature every biennium.
Well, since no doubt we all want to protect the teacher retirement system, would you accept an amendment that would hold the teacher retirement system harmless from the effects of this bill? That is to say, if we lose contributors to the teacher retirement system, that the legislature will put more money into it in order to protect the teacher retirement system from being out of sync.
That is a question for maybe the other committee you serve on.
No, it would be an amendment to this bill to provide that the teacher retirement system cannot be made actuarially unsound by giving $1 billion away to private school students.
There will be ample opportunity to offer amendments on this bill as this bill moves forward.
Would you accept that kind of an amendment?
I will look at all amendments, but I do not know the impact. I don't know. From my visits with TRS in my office and their association and their people showed a level of concern for this bill that was not significant, regardless of GRF, GRC, or whoever. That was not what was communicated to me because I asked them directly. And they were more concerned about teacher pay raises and the impact than they were about this bill.
Well, I'll just say that we have to work with objective data, and the consultant to TRS told us that for every 10 children that leave the public schools and go to private schools, we lose one teacher or other educational professional, which means we lose one teacher or educational professional who is contributing to the teacher retirement system. And if you have 100,000 people sign up for this bill, and you surely are expecting that, or you wouldn't put $1 billion in here, we're going to lose 10,000 teachers or other educational professionals that will no longer be contributing to the teacher retirement system. No actuary would ever say he would not be concerned about that.
Well, that was exactly what was given to me by TRS.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Chairman Ashby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, I want to publicly thank you for working with myself and I'm sure other committee members and drafting the committee substitute. In particular, there's 2 or 3 things there that, as you know, we talked about. And anyway, I appreciate you putting those in there. I think it strengthens the bill. However, as you know, I also think that there are some what I would consider common sense measures that could be incorporated in this bill, should it go over today, that do things like, generally speaking, improve accountability, further strengthen taxpayer protections through this program, address the imbalance, as you heard my superintendent testify, in terms of the imbalance between our public school and our private school, the ESA participants. And I appreciate the work you're doing. I know what you're doing to address that specifically with norm reference tests and replacing STAR. And so I'm cautiously optimistic on what you're doing on that front. But I do think that's something that, as Representative and Hossa spoke to you earlier, I do think that's something that we need to be mindful of. And then lastly, personally, I think that, with a program like this and looking at the taxpayer commitment, I do think that it would stand to reason that we look at a formal review process or a sunset review process in 4 or 6 years by a future legislature to really look at the impact of this program across the spectrum in our private schools, our public schools, look at the effectiveness and I know you love to talk about what is the impact on kids. And so I guess my question, which is a very simple one, is just like you did on the prior bill, I just would like to hear you publicly express your continued interest in working with myself and other committee members if this process does move today, as we get towards the floor and looking at amendments or perfecting amendment by the bill author, that you will continue to work with us to improve this bill and strengthen it.
Absolutely. I mean, this is obviously, I would say, a more contentious bill than the last one. There's disagreements on here, and there are things that I believe that this policy, that someone on this dais would never vote for, and I respect that.
but I will always, and believe this position requires someone to always listen to ideas. There are things in the committee sub today that, or things that you and I talked about. There are things that Mr. Tellerico and I talked about. And, and there's some things that Chairman Frank and I talked about. So that part does work, and it will continue to work. And you have my commitment to continue to work on this issue.
Thank you. And I appreciate you, Sam, because, we've heard a lot of discussion about this, and I didn't want that to get lost in this discussion, that you're still open to strengthening and improving this bill. And I look forward to working with you on some of those areas that you already know about, that I believe can strengthen this bill. So thank you for that, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ashby. All right. Chair recognizes Vice Chair Bernal.
Thank you, Chairman. As you can imagine, this part for me is a little bit uncomfortable. It's not often that the Vice Chair disagrees with the Chair publicly, but one, I feel about the bill, but also I actually think it's really important that we model for the body, especially some of our colleagues who are not in here, how we can disagree and then have to keep working together on other things. There's an expectation sometimes that we obliterate each other, and I don't think that's necessarily healthy. That being said, I really appreciate the last line of questioning by Chairman Ashby, because I do think that's important. Almost in an uncomfortable way, in the last, but we talked about how even though some things need to get better, that even though some things aren't perfect, that there's enough faith and respect amongst us that we can take the time between now and the floor to make things better, that things are not fully baked. And while that has to be true for school finance, I think it's my expectation, everyone else's. We just heard your commitment, which I appreciate, that's also the case here. And I want to make sort of my pitch there. I understand people's feelings about opportunity. I understand what people are saying about helping families. We could all come up with an example of some touch-up in one way or the other that should or shouldn't benefit. But I can't help but think about our own philosophies, our own ideologies that we use in this building all the time. And does anyone know what a cranial remolding orthosis is?
You do now.
Right. It's a baby helmet, right? It's a baby helmet. And for about 8 years, I've been trying to, I promise this relates to the bill. For about 8 years, I've been trying to pass a
I think
bill.
we're way off that track by now. So go ahead.
For 8 years, I've been trying to pass a bill that would have Medicaid cover the cost of baby helmets. And for all those 8 years, I've been told no. And the reason I've been told no is this fear that somehow some black market cottage industry will be created where these things are overprescribed, and kids who don't get it, who don't need it, will get it. That somehow there'll be too many baby helmets. The kids who need it, not just for their brain development, but for cosmetic purposes, will get it. And they're not the ones who deserve it. So for 8 years, the answer has been no. The fiscal note on that bill is $1 million. $1 million. A no worth $1 million for baby helmets. Because we're worried that kids, babies, who don't need it will get it. That isn't justification for that, for the no's. And yet here, I understand the 20% piece, and I understand what it's attempting to do. But in light of that, what I hear it saying is not that it's limited to 20% of those students, but that it's reserved for them. That 20% of the bill is reserved for people that we already know don't need it. And the possibility of that group can grow. I'm not saying that's the spirit of the chairman, but in light of all the no's that some of us have endured over time, whether it comes to baby helmets or foster care or the uninsured, it is hard to stomach and swallow, right? Because we've been told no for a variety of reasons for people who are certainly more deserving at a cost that's far less than this is in its first year, its second, or the remainder. And so I'd like for us to keep that in mind, there's two ways that those of us who are in the position that I'm in can go about our work here. One is being a hard no and just saying no all the time. And sometimes our job is to change policy for the better and make it the best version of itself that it can be. And so that's where I think we are. In the end, we may vote no, but if we really are serious about making sure that this bill helps the people that we believe it's supposed to help, then the question I would ask is, does the version in front of us do that? And if it doesn't, then just like the last bill, Chairman, we take the time between now and the floor to change it to make sure that it does that in a way not just that makes the people who are still going to vote no comfortable, but also for the people who honestly feel pressured to vote yes can be more enthusiastic about. I think that you've shown that you're willing to do that based on the same effort and the same goodwill that you've shown with the last bill. We will work very closely together on, and we'll continue to do that goodwill makes its way to this bill as well.
Representative Schoolcraft, for a question, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm done.
Representative Hinojosa for a question.
Yes, the on page 29 of the bill, it says tuition and fees as prohibited. It says an education service provider or vendor of educational products may not charge participating child an amount greater than the standard amount charged for that service or product by the provider or vendor. A standard amount is not defined. It has come to my attention that there are religious schools that have one price for people of that faith and a different price for the people who are not of that faith. And I'm asking whether that will continue to be allowed for recipients of this voucher.
Okay. So it's like, yeah. I don't know if I understand completely. So you're talking about a product?
I think this also applies to tuition, but either way.
Okay, there you're talking about tuition. Okay, I'm
Right.
sorry. Yeah.
Either way, for example, can a Catholic school, my understanding that there are religious schools, and I don't want to call it one religion and get it wrong, but there are religious schools that have different prices depending on whether or not you are a person of that faith. Will recipients of this voucher be allowed to continue to discriminate based on religion, charging one price for people of the faith and a different price for people not of that faith?
I am not advised if that occurs. I know that, from what I understand, Catholic schools provide scholarships to students regardless of their religious beliefs, and then these would be able to access. But student is attending a Catholic school, they can use their ESA just as they could in any other setting.
And so if a school does provide does provide that whether or not you are of the faith, you pay a different price, will that continue to be allowed if they receive the voucher?
I believe what the operation, if you will, of a private school or Catholic school in this instance will remain the purview of that school.
So they'll still be able to charge different prices.
I don't know that they do that, but
Okay. I want to speak to something that Representative Ashby brought up, in this idea of a sunset. I would ask that if we're going to, or actually either way, I would ask that the chairman look at the part of the bill that does an annual report and demographic report. Those two are separate for some reason.
I'm sorry.
So it's page 33, goes through 34 and 35. And I'm not understanding why those two things are separate. I would ask that we combine those and that we also look at what this doesn't cover in this report is how students who were not in private school, so who are coming from the public school, and the figure I have from the LBB report is they project that only 14% of students will leave the public school. So most of the kids, according to LBB, will be private school kids. But for those kids that leave the public school and go to private school, how it impacts them. That currently is not data that's collected. It doesn't divide up the kids who are already in private schools who are now getting the voucher versus the kids for who this is a new experience for them. And so I would ask that we do that. And I just want to finally correct the record and say, I believe my colleague is misremembering that we heard from the TRS executive director, Mr. Guthrie, for our school finance bill. We never got to hear for this bill, any iterations of this bill. And while I really appreciated hearing the expertise from our colleague who sits on the pensions committee, I think that it's a very important information, and I wish we would have had a resource witness here from the TRS to answer those questions.
Is there objection to adoption of the committee substitute? Chair hears none. The substitute is adopted. The chair moves that SB2 as substituted be favorably reported to the full House with the recommendation that it do pass and be printed. The clerk will call the roll.
Chairman Buckley,
Aye.
Vice Chair Bernal,
No.
Allen,
No.
Ashby,
Aye.
Bryant,
No.
Cunningham,
Aye.
Dutton,
No.
Frank,
Aye.
Hinojosa,
No.
Hunter,
Yes.
Kerwin,
Aye.
Leach,
Yes.
Leo Wilson,
Aye.
Schoolcraft,
Aye.
Talarico, L.
There being 9 ayes, 6 nays, the motion prevails.